I am here with Jonathan Booker, our underwriter. So, Jonathan, when someone reaches out to you and they're wanting to get a loan on a flip, how are you vetting them as a borrower?
The very first thing, and this is really just what will dictate what I do next, is how much experience do they have? And then also, how much do I know, how well do I know the person who's referring them to me? So you could get somebody, I could get someone who's referred to me who I know someone okay, not extremely well, and they just tell me they've done a couple of flips before. That's definitely better, but it's not like a strong recommendation. But then there's also recommendations where you have someone who we've given 10 or 15 loans to, and they say that they've worked with this person for years. I'm going to go into the second situation very partial towards that borrower, whereas the first situation, my mind is going to be, focused on actively verifying their experience. In some cases, I would want to get an address. And in cases where, I don't love the endorsement, or I kind of want a little bit more confidence, I will ask for addresses and then match them up to the LLCs so I can see that there's a history of those LLCs owning it. That doesn't necessarily happen a lot because luckily most of our deals come from solid referrals. But, it's a bit of a qualitative process of, how well do you trust the person referring that person over to you, and the level of confidence you get from that will kind of determine how deeply I'll look into it.
Yeah. In addition, we're getting bank statements and credit checks.
No, most definitely. So once I kind of determine which way we're going, for everyone on first-time borrowers, we're going to get a credit check and a bank statement. We don't do hard credit checks just because that makes things easier on them, but they do generate basically a full credit report and send it to us that we want to see is pretty current with their name and date on it so that we have a copy of their full credit history. So we do that on first-time borrowers every time.
So the borrower checks out, seems like we'll say middle, kind of a par borrower, not phenomenal, but not brand new. Then they send you the deal in an email with pictures and purchase contract. What's kind of the first things you're looking for? How are you vetting now the deal itself?
My biggest question is just what is the as-is value of that house? And I think that a lot of lenders might approach it in a similar way, but at the end of the day, that we're going to have a lien against that property for a certain amount of money. And if we can't sell that property in the worst case scenario and make that money back, it's not going to work. So if we have a borrower who, they seem like a solid borrower, but they haven't demonstrated a history with us, to me, the qualification is the loan to as-is value metric, which we like to see that at 85%. The reason we like to see it at 85% is because that number, that extra 15%, accounts for our profits from the deal. So if we need to make our points and interest after holding this thing for 6 months and then we sell it without any improvements being done, we can make all of our profits back. And it also underwrites a percentage decline in the market as well. So if you're holding this for 6 months and you're underwriting to a potentially strong decline in the market of like 5 to 10%, you're going to want to account for maybe a 5% drop in the market, as well as making a good amount of points on top of that to compensate us for our time. So that's why we start that number at around 85%. So, if I don't have really strong history with a borrower performing on deals with us, that's where the blanket, the bedrock of safety comes from, is the knowledge that if you needed to, you could exit that asset and be completely safe.
And how are you determining the as-is value?
And that's where it gets tough. So, the most ideal situation is that the house is in moderate condition to where other houses will sell on the market in the same condition, if that makes sense. So, you could look at the house and find a very accurate comp, which is in similar condition of a similar size that's sold in the last 6 months. I would say that is the best case scenario for finding the as-is value, is actually having a good as-is comp. That can become difficult because a lot of the time these houses are trading off market in horrible condition. And if a house is in horrible condition, no one is photographing the inside and sharing what the inside looks like on Zillow. They take a photograph of the outside and they say, flipper's dream, and they throw it up there on the MLS, right? So in that situation, and this is actually really relevant to the borrower too. In that situation, we rely on the borrower to a certain degree to communicate how much work needs to be done with the property. And this is a perfect example of where we would have to use more due diligence with a borrower we don't know versus a borrower we do know. So, if this is a borrower that I have a lot of confidence in, I'm happy to, in many cases, take the photographs that they've taken to the inside, as well as take their word for what they say needs to be done, because there's certain things you can't check with photographs. You need to know about the foundation. You need to know about potential electrical and plumbing problems. Those aren't always communicated by photographs. So I would be trusting that borrower to a certain degree to accurately communicate that to me, right? So if you have a borrower who has you have solid confidence in, you can kind of trust that, and that will give you your idea of the rehab budget, right? And at that point, you would essentially be reverse engineering the flip, right? So you'd say, when this thing is in great condition, what is it going to be selling for on the market? We put it into our underwriting spreadsheet, which calculates the costs, the carrying costs, the rehab costs, the closing costs. And you just need to make sure that they have a reasonable, healthy spread, right? So if they can buy it for that price, put the rehab that they've communicated into it, which we believe them on and have verified as well as we can. If they have a spread after that, then that is where, in my mind, you can kind of reverse engineer the as-is value and say, people will want to buy this for this price. That's one of the scenarios where we have good confidence in the word of the borrower. The other scenario is we don't necessarily want to take their word for it, not because they're not trustworthy, but just because we don't have the track record and we don't have a very strong endorsement of them. In that situation, you just view every variable pessimistically. So if there's something bad could be happening here and you're not sure about it and you don't have someone giving you the confidence, you're just going to take the worst case scenario of the two possibilities, which oftentimes ends up with you having a really conservative price. In some cases, with a small house and it might actually you might simply end up being at the land value because you don't know whether a house is a tear down. So that doesn't happen a lot, but
it did just happen.
Yeah. This is why I would say in general, if you're dealing with a lender, over communication is really helpful because that gives us a sense of confidence all the time. Even if you don't need to be telling us everything, if you are consistently communicating what's going on with the deal as often as possible, then it builds rapport and it builds confidence in you, the borrower, and it makes us inclined to take your word for it when you're telling us about an inspection or about what needs to be done to a house.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate that info, Jonathan, and thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like this video and subscribe.